If you want to learn how to protect your inventions, please watch this video. Okay, so I came up with this great idea of a rotating label. And I realized there's probably lots of different types of labels out there, so I had to learn all about the label industry. And the first thing I had to realize, how do you make a rotating label? How do I make a label that when it goes on a container would actually turn and people could use it and it's easy to do and it could actually be manufactured? So how did I go about to figure this out? Well, I went down to one of the manufacturing plants that was local. I looked at some of the machinery and I thought to myself, I'll never figure this out. I actually then went to another manufacturing facility pretty far away, I have to tell you, and started to ask some questions. They gave me a great tour, and I realized I was going to have to reverse engineer how things were done. And the first thing I realized, I'm going to have to start playing, start thinking, start experimenting, building prototypes, because there's no way I was going to figure this out without just opening my mind to all the possibilities. So here, as you see right now, this is a label on a water bottle. And as I turn it around here, James, get a good view of it right here. There's a little window. As you spin it, you can see it changes. So how do you put that first label on? How do you get that label on so you can actually spin the label for more information? How do you do that? Okay, so first you put the base label on. Now, what's really interesting about this base label, there's a couple different ways you could put this on. It could be a pressure-sensitive label, which would go on and it would stick to it, or it could be a cut and stack label, which has glue on both ends of the label and would wrap around. It would stay on the container. You cannot get it off. But it's that second label that spins. How do I get it to spin? So here, I'm going to show you. Here is the outside of the label. This is the portion that's going to spin around. Now, I realized that the front end, the leading edge, has to stick to the container, just like this, while this label gets wrapped around and gets glued to itself. But now, how does it spin? Because that leading edge, what do I have to do to get this leading edge on there, to stay on there, while it would wrap around and glue to itself to allow it to spin? So that's the big question. And that was my intellectual property. So let's talk about all the different ways I figured out to get the label to spin. The first thing I discovered, that maybe this leading edge would have glue that would stick to the container, while the label would wrap around and has glue on one edge, and it would glue to itself. But the first area of glue, this first leading edge glue, I realized that maybe that glue would break away. Maybe it was a glue that would stick for a little bit, but once it would harden, you could crack it and spin the top label. Yes, that was one of the first things I discovered. And I found a patent on breakaway adhesive. So I found a way that I could get the label to adhere to the container, and once it would wrap to itself, you could snap it and it would start to spin. And that technology, as you can see here, that's what this does. This is called breakaway adhesive, and the label spins. So number one, breakaway adhesive. But what are some of the other things I could do? Well, number one, maybe pressure. Maybe I would have claims on maybe something would come down and hold it tight. That leading edge, hold it tight while it wrapped around. So I had pressure. I thought, well, maybe water or maybe static electricity. I started thinking about all the different things that could hold that leading edge down while the label would wrap around itself and glue to itself, but later it would allow it to spin. And I included all those different manufacturing techniques. I listed them: breakaway adhesive, water, holding it down with pressure. I listed all of those. But here's the catch here, you guys. And this is something that I think is very important to understand. What I also realized, if I included language language that would be a little bit more expansive, because I talked about the different ways to do it. But what if I talked about, use words such as this: anything that would couple and uncouple, anything that would couple that leading edge down, anything that would couple while it wraps around, and then would uncouple. Those type of words made it extremely broad. So I went ahead and filed patents on being very narrow, like breakaway adhesive, but then I filed patents on maybe some of the other techniques we talked about. Maybe I included them in a patent, but then I used words like couple and uncouple. That gave it not only narrow, but made it extremely broad in my protection and the claims. So that technology I just showed you, that's called cut and stack. That's a typical label construction. They run on very high-speed equipment. It's very, very common. And I was able to use that breakaway adhesive to put, and James, you can show a little video, show how that works. And that's the technology I got to work. Now, how do you put a breakaway adhesive on the leading edge? There's more IP there, because now we're talking about a separate glue pot with breakaway adhesive, because there's two adhesives. There's one on the leading edge and one on the trailing edge. So now I filed intellectual property on two glue pots holding two different types of adhesive. I want to show you one more example of how to think a little bit differently, but in such a way that you're protecting all the different ways that, in my situation, how a rotating label could be made. And here's another one I'm going to show you. This is a cup, and on this cup there's a window here, and when you spin it, you can spin it. It does different things. In fact, what's really cool about it, there's Katy Perry here, I think, and if you spin it, her hair changes. Okay, so how did I get this on here? Because it's tapered. It's not a straight wall, it's tapered. Well, this was called a shrink sleeve. Let's see if I get it off. Here you go. This label was a sleeve. And when the cup was like this going down the conveyor belt, this sleeve would go over like this. And then with hot air, it would conform, and it would hang on to the little ledge of the container here. So it would stay on the container, and it would allow you to spin it. That's called a shrink sleeve. But regardless, that's technology I filed on how to make a rotating label, not only on a container, but now on a cup that's tapered. So in conclusion, when you're trying to protect your invention, you're trying to find all the different ways it could be made. And in my situation, using label technology, I had to understand how all these other labels were being applied to containers. Then I had to come up with different ways to get that label to spin. Now, it sounds fairly simple. It took quite a few years to figure it out, because I needed new equipment, new glue pots I mentioned, maybe two different labelers. But the thought process was, how can I make a label, a top label, that could be applied to different size containers to have it spin, rotate, to add that 75% more information that consumers wanted on packaging, because there just wasn't enough. And what was really important here, that extra space could be used for weight-based dosing, coupons, promotional stuff, or even telling a story of the next movie that's going to come out in a theater. Just by spinning the label, you can see maybe scenes of the movie. So in conclusion, once again, what was really exciting about this, people wanted more information on a label. My job was to figure out all the different types of labels out there, and then try to figure out how to put a spinning label on a base label on a container that we could run at high speeds in their current manufacturing facilities. That's why there's so many patents behind me on all the different types of all the different ways to build a rotating label. So for me, protecting my inventions really meant coming up with variations on how my invention could be made. Looking at all the workarounds that people might try to get around me. For me to file all the different variations and workarounds, so I really own not only the invention, but I own the innovation. And I filed patents on the innovation of a rotating label, how to manufacture it, and all the different ways it could be used. So when people ask me all the time, Steve, you talk about variations and workarounds and expanding your claims to make them very broad. The way I do it, I look at all the different ways you can do it and start thinking about how people would work around me. So I file things that are very narrow, but I also go very broad to protect all different ways for someone to manufacture or make my invention and use it. Thank you for watching this video. I'm going to keep diving in to show you how you can get paid for inventions, how you can stop other people from copying your inventions, and how you can play the biggest game in the world with intellectual property by filing patents that truly have value in the marketplace. If you have any more questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me, Stephen at patentyourinventions.com. And here's my channel up here. And if you want to watch more videos, please click here.